Hi everyone, welcome to Xisa Play. Today, we'll talk about project or phase closure. As they say, finish what you start. Every project starts with a goal. Then comes a series of steps. Until finally, the goal is achieved. During a progress check, we find that we've actually reached our goal. So what's next? Time to wrap things up. We can start the closing process. So, about project or phase closure. It's one of the 5 main process groups. The closing process group. So, what's the purpose of this group? Simply put, it's about wrapping up the project. 4 projects with multiple phases. It's about closing each individual phase. Let's break down its main task. Concluding the project. Closing the current phase. Finalizing contracts. This includes ending procurement relationships, if any exist. But why is this process important? First, this allows us to archive key project information, including all phase-related documentation. This helps us complete our planned deliverables. It also frees up our team members, so they can move on to their next project and take on new assignments. During the project closure phase, there's one critical input we need, known as the accepted deliverables. Where do these accepted deliverables come from? They're part of our scope management process, specifically the validate scope procedure. The scope validation process. Its key concept is acceptance. Once we have the accepted deliverables, we can then request the client to begin the acceptance review and schedule an acceptance meeting. If the client agrees, we can proceed with the acceptance meeting. The final outcome from the acceptance meeting is usually the transfer of deliverables and the final product and service outcome. The handover process. This naturally involves preparing a final project report to account for our work to management. Once that's done, we usually do a retrospective, looking at our successes and failures, and compile the lessons learned. Finally, we add these insights to our organizational process assets, updating our company-wide knowledge base, making it easier for future projects to leverage these best practices and successful strategies during the project closure phase. First, who's responsible for the acceptance process? If we go back to the very start, you'll remember we created the project charter. When drafting this document, we established the project's basic framework, scope, and requirements, and outlined the acceptance criteria. When we reach the end of the project phase, we'll check against these criteria to ensure everything matches up. Once everything checks out, we'll deliver the final product, either to the client or to the operations team. Next, we'll hold meetings to review our experiences and lessons learned, and compile a lessons learned register to update company-wide documentation, a valuable process asset, which we'll preserve for use in future projects. We also need to create a final report. This report accounts for our work to the organization, covering all key aspects of the project. All this important information becomes part of our company's knowledge base. Let's take a look at the project closure phase. First, we complete the closing task. First, we need to compile the project documents into a final documentation package, which includes the lessons learned log. Then we need to finalize all contracts and agreements. This means settling all matters between the client and contractor parties. Through this process, we compile the lessons learned and collect all relevant project documentation as required. Finally, we prepare the final project report. All of these fall under updating organizational process assets. Items for update. Next, we also deal with the final product and service deliverables for acceptance. If acceptance is required, we typically receive formal acceptance documents. These include acceptance forms, project closure reports, and handover documentation. If you're transferring the project, you'll need a formal handover document. This includes things like user manuals, operational guidelines, technical documentation. In the event that the project needs to be terminated mid-development, if early termination occurs, we need to explain precisely why the project was terminated. These reasons must be documented. Additionally, we should list all completed deliverables. How much should we pay? Needs to be clearly determined. All deliverables must be transferred to the client. Then the client will make the agreed payment. Finally, we need to release the resources. Once these resources are freed up, they can be reassigned to the next project team. Remember when we discussed how in exams, we typically assume it follows a matrix structure, which forms a balanced matrix. Once the project is complete, team members return to their respective functional teams to await their next project assignment. Let's take a look at the final documentation and contract closing procedures. First, about the documentation. After project completion, we must update all project documentation and mark it as the final version. This includes all process documentation, along with topics for our final review meeting. The lessons learned register. Everything needs to be finalized into their final versions. This includes more than just the lessons learned register. All requirements documentation submitted throughout the project. Design specifications. Development documentation. Task documentation. All these materials must be preserved, including the issue tracking logs. Project risk log. Risk register. All these items should be properly documented. These documents will be compiled into a final version. So, if you notice that a project is in its final stages of document finalization, it indicates that the project or phase is being closed out. The next step is contract closure. Contract closure involves matters between the client and the contractor. Firstly, we need to verify the contractor's deliverables. All deliverables have passed the acceptance inspection. This falls under the seller's responsibilities. All items have been approved and accepted. Furthermore, the buyer is obligated to make the corresponding payments as specified. This is another key point to note. In the event of disputes between parties involving claims, a claims resolution process must be initiated. We'll touch briefly on claims processing. This topic rarely appears in examinations. It's a minor examination point. It rarely comes up in exams. Let's take a quick look at this. The first step is negotiation. Try to resolve it through negotiation. If negotiations break down, usually in contracts, there's an ADR clause, which stands for Alternative Dispute Resolution. You follow whatever method is specified. If that fails, you can go for arbitration and file the paperwork. If arbitration proves unsuccessful, we'll move forward with litigation. The goal is to maintain professional relationships whenever possible. Legal action should only be taken as a final measure. This is our approach. We prioritize diplomatic solutions before taking formal action. When handling compensation claims, in procurement-related matters, the key stakeholders are primarily the procurement department. Your procurement team will handle this, not the project manager directly. Let's team up with him on this. Next, we'll update all the records. Then we'll report on the outcome. All information needs to be archived. This covers the contract closure process. Moving on, we have another point about. Once done, we'll draft a final report. This final report is really for our company's benefit. It serves as a crucial record. It briefs management on the project's overall status. You'll see, we typically use a final report to summarize project performance. This usually includes a general project overview, information about quality, scope, and budget, how the project performed in different areas, any risks and challenges we faced, the final products and services delivered, along with verification details. It covers all aspects of the project, giving a complete picture. It shows the company how I managed the project, my overall performance, and how the project progressed throughout. Here's the final report.